Hello everybody. In this video we're going to continue working with our Node.js app. This is actually I will say a fall 2021 video, but I'm using exactly the same code that we have for the previous one when we created the Node.js app itself, the basic server. What I want to do now is to make a little more robust, a little more production ready, have a little bit of best practices up there. What I want to do later in the third video, we're going to do the to-do app through an API. So we'll be able to save to-dos and read, create, and pull the to-do dependency status and change the status. So that will be the idea. But in this video, the first thing I want to do is just want to make this a little bit more robust in order to have a better understanding, a better way to handle the information. So let's get started. The first thing that we need to do is we need to get rid of everything that is regarding hard-coded code. They're like secret, like port number, things like that. So what I want to do is I want to implement, and it's one of the first things that we need to do, is implement .env. .env is a way to like actually open the package manager. It's a server dependency module that allows environment variables. So we pretty much install it, we execute the config, and we have a env file, as you know that we did it in the Vue.js application, where we save the different variables and then we can use it through the process env. So after we use that, we should be able to get it. So let's see what we can actually do. So right now, let me just import npm install, I will do .env, right? And instead of actually having here, what I want to do is in my source directory, I will create a new folder called utils. And my utils, I will create one called configurations. So let's do a new file called config.javascript. And in there, we just need to do a simple import. Let's do * everything as .env from .env. And then we just do .env.config. That means that we just initialize it and we just do export default. Let's do export const config. And let's actually do default.env. Right? That will allow us to have our variable. Actually, we don't need to export it right now. We just need to do this one. And I believe .env is not smart enough to do it like this. So this will allow us just to use it and import in our main application. That will help us. Let's create a new file at .env. Is get guided by default. Let's put it here. We need to have a couple of. Let's declare our node environment to be development. By default, Node.js works different in development than in production. So in development, we'll have access to another type of tools to troubleshoot and debug. So we're saying that we are working on development environment. When we're going to push it to production, we're going to change that to actually be to be production, and the build package should be smaller because the environment changes. Let's actually do the port number. And let's do this one equal to 3000, right? Having that in place, we can get rid of this port and we can do process.env.port. and we do npm run that, we should be able to get it. You can open Insomnia or any other HTTP clients. What I did here extra, if I look for Thunder client and I install it, it's pretty neat because it's like a little Insomnia inside VS Code, so I don't need to do anything. So I create a new request. That request going to be to localhost or 3000, and I send it. And we have an issue. Connection refused by the server. Oh, yes, of course. And something that I want to mention also. So let me stop my server. So the issue that we have is we created the .env util, but we actually not using it anywhere. So in order to use it in our main Java index Java, JS in the very beginning, we just need to execute that with a simple utils config, right? So import that and do npm run development. That will allow us to make a call to port 3000, and we have response with the hello there. So that's pretty much the first step. After we have that first step, what I want to do now is I want to, oops, sorry for that. What I want to do is go a little bit more complex configuration, and don't worry, this is going to be one time. And after we have that, we can actually, how can I say it? You can just copy and paste it later. So one of the issues that we can see through this process is when your ENV is not set up correctly. Let's say, for example, this one, the port is not there, right? Should be greater than 0. We can have that kind of error. In this case, it works, right? But what happens when we have something like this? Like the port is not defined. As you can see, we don't have an error, but when we try to use the app, the connection refused, like it's not working correctly. That is happening because we don't have a validation in our, how can I say, it doesn't have a validation in our configuration itself. So one way to do it, um, well, one way to handle it, and in order to make it a little bit better, I will say, is to add that configuration, that validation. There's several packages that do this and there over npm, but one of I saw, I don't remember where, but I was reading an approach and that actually like it, and I want to implement it. So I'm going to install Joy. Let's remember, oops, Joy npm install Joy. This is for validation. Remember that we use it in Vue.js, and we can actually use it here too. And in the configuration, we just need to import Joy from Joy, right? After we have that, we can actually create a schema and can do cons or environment schema. And actually, I already tried to ask me to do it as a Joy object. And we can do to start, it's going to be an object, right? Let's the env schema, let's call it. So by default, it's going to be an object. And then we can say we need to have the different keys. Let's actually close this like this. That object will have different keys, and we need to validate each one of those keys in order to get it. So we have something like this, for example. We need to have the node EMB, right? It needs to be development or production. Let's remove this. I don't want to have this for default. And default is going to be development. That means if we don't define it, we're going to put as a development by default right away, right? It's going to be a string, and these are the only two possible options. If we put anything else, it should not be there, right? Should be more than enough. And the other one that we can actually do, and it actually gives us right there, is the port, right? The port needs to be a number. Is default is going to be 3000, but it can actually do the port needs to be positive. And all these elements actually came from Joy. If you look for the Joy documentation, you can see the different type of validation that you can have. So here we just create another schema, and later when we need to have more, we just need to add it there, right? We close it, right? And we have our EMB schema working the way it's supposed to. The only things that we'll add is added the unknown, and this will just allow to add like extra elements that will be defined if we need it later, right? So this is just to create the schema itself for validation. Now, what we need to do is we need to validate or process EMB that came from .env through this schema. So it's going to be our EMB schema dot validate or process EMB, right? As simple as that. But let's do let's extract some elements from here. So before we actually validate, I will say that I would prefer, and this came on the documentation too, that my error handling or my errors element errors is going to be in my label with the key element of the label, right? Don't worry, as I said before, this is going to be just once in order to have it, and I know it's a little complex, but it's just JavaScript itself, and we just enjoy to validate the process EMB. So we have the EMB schema. In the EMB schema, we just validate the process EMB, and we need to extract from here, and that's the good part. We will need to extract the value, and we call this EMB. Let's call it EMB, and the error, right? We just need to extract it, the value, and we call the value EMB, and the error, and we can say a simple validation. If we have an error, we just throw a new error. And let's actually throw new error, and we can something like that, config validation error message is not working the way it's supposed to, right? It's a simple error by itself, and we can do export default or EMB variables, right? So having this, we have a little better understanding now about what it needs to be done. So if I run this again, npm run that, we have an issue with it prefers, it's not a function. Why is not, oh, this actually pref in plural. Let me run it again. No, the media one, development or production. And right now, what we have is the I have a typo. So as you can see right there, it's already working. So if I change this to development, and I restart my application, now my application is working, right? I'm able to use it now, like it was able to consume those variables itself. As you can see, I don't have the port, but because in my configuration I have a default, that's actually work. Another way just to enforce that validation is instead of having the default value, we can just change this to require, and this one to require. And that will allow me to have my port is required in my configuration and it's not where it's supposed to be, right? So that means that I just need to put my port equal 3000, restart my app, and now my configuration works the way that it's supposed to. Now one last thing, I can use it and it's working the way they're supposed to, right? I can still use my package to process.env and should be more than enough, or I can use it a little bit different. I can use import env from my utils, and then just because of that, I can use env dot, and I have my not actually have my port there. I don't know if it's actually not showing it. I can do something like this, and this is going to work too, right? Because I'm exporting the env variables. Now, I can use the export like this, or I can just export something like this to be a little more. We'll have a duplication a little bit, but I can do something like node env is going to be my env dot node env, and my port will be my env port, right? If I do something like this, I'm exporting this value in this form, this is not valid anymore, and I have an issue here. We can actually change this, that's okay. So we can actually do env dot port, or we can actually just get my port, or I can actually do import everything as config, right? And I can use my config dot port, and that should be working the way they're supposed to. This actually request prefer the request. Oh, because I'm importing my configuration, I can actually do my port is going to be extracted from there, right? This is what I'm doing from my configuration, and now my port is going to be used in my app. It's supposed to be used in the app. Let me see what I did wrong here. Mm. Let's do application listen in my config.port. It's not there. So I have my email B. This actually should work. What is not working? If we do something like that, that's not working. Oh, wait. Sorry. I'm sorry, I'm troubleshooting right now. Probably this one need to change. There you go. Yeah, I mean, because I imported the default, I don't need to have the star. I sometimes forget that. Sorry for that. But now I can actually import my configuration, and I can use my configuration port in order to pull up that data and actually use um, utilize different elements that it can be done. So that's one that is actually really cool. Right? Another one that we can actually use, um, and let's actually create this and add it config, right? The other one that should be really useful is to change the logger, right? In order to print information here in a better way. One of the best ones that we can use, yeah, actually we can use two different, is one to will log every express call and something and anything that we can actually send the way that we want to send. So for that, and I will show you, we need to import install Morgan, and Morgan is really simple to use. And let me just show you a little bit what it is. npm Morgan. Morgan, what it does is a request logger middleware that we just imported, and then we just use it. And it actually doesn't show here how to use it, but we just need to send every request um, from Express to use that particular logger itself. It's really simple to use. So after we install it, I will go to my utils. I will create a new one called logger.javascript, and I'll import logger from actually import Morgan from Morgan, right? And we can use cons logger equal Morgan development, and we'll do export default logger, right? Simple like that. This is what we allow us to do in our index is we need just to import logger from our utils logger, and in our application, before every call, we can actually do our application will use, and this is actually called a middleware, and we're going to use the logger that we just imported. That will allow us to do npm run dev. And the pretty cool about this logger is that every time that we make a request, that request is going to be handled there. Will tell you where we call it, the method, where it was called, and the response status, and the size of the request, and how long it took to make it. So this is a really simple way to track when it's receiving a call the correct way that it's supposed to be. So that's pretty much Morgan. That's what Morgan does for us, and it helps us in that particular piece. Now, the only thing with Morgan is we cannot send custom. How can I say? How can I call this? Let's call this logger middleware. Let's export that. Let's call this middleware, probably, and let's export it like this. And if we export it like that, that means that this is going to be logger dot middleware. There you go. Tested? Yes, it's still working. The only thing problem with Morgan is that if we want to send something custom that is not a request, we are not able to do it through there. So we're going to use another one that's really simple, and that one is called Consola. Let's just npm install Consola, and we just need to import it. Import Consola from Consola, right? And we just need to export middleware, and we need to export Consola. But how we can actually call mm, let's actually do cons log Consola, probably, and let's export the log. Yeah, that should be more than enough. What will help us with that? That means that instead of using something like we want to verify something, we can do console.log doing a call, right? If with something like that, it's not best practice. It gets exported where it's supposed to be, but it's not best practice to use the console log itself. So in this case, I will just like to use the logger log.info, for example, and that will allow us, oops, let me go here, to have a different call. Oh, I said Ingo instead of info. Info. There you go. So we have the little info call over there. And what is pretty neat is that we can actually change that to success, for example. That will give that little check mark that everything went fine. When we have an issue, we can change this to 1, right? And that will allow us to have that little 1 with that space so we can actually see it in the logs right away. Or we can actually do an error, and the error will be a little more called something like that, like really easy to pump up when something went bad, right? So in this case, and as you can see over here, let me just get back to here. This will change to success, right? And doing calling root. Let's call it later, right? This will allow us to do some changes in our configuration, right? As you can see, we can throw a new error, and we can actually use, we can actually import from here. Import logger from the logger itself, and we can do logger.log.error, and actually send my error message, right? Let me try to remove this. Let me try to get rid of my port and restart my app. And we can actually see that we have an error there that my port was required, and it's simpler to see what was the issue right away. We can use something like that, and actually let's throw the error too. So right away we'll see what was the issue. Or we can actually, instead of throw the error, we can do console log error, and what else we can use? npm console. Let me look for that one. I believe we can print the stack trace or something like that. Oh, we send the error inside, right? So we can actually send the error through here, so we can have the stack trace a little more easy to read. So instead of throwing it over here, we just call all this new error message right here, right? And that will allow us to have, instead of having all these elements, that probably is a little bit difficult to understand, a little more easy to see through here. Confirm valid error port is required, right? The port was not there. And we can see the stack trace where it actually happened, right? And it happened in my utils configuration line 21st, where it actually did get triggered. So I can actually do the stack trace and do everything that is supposed to be, right? So let me return my port and let's get back to that. So we have two different elements that are working the way they're supposed to be. The logger and the configuration by itself. And it's actually a really cool configuration what we did. So let me just add everything and added the logger. Remember that what we're doing right now, we're just making our application production ready. That's it. Nothing else. So I was mentioning before that the use of middlewares, right? Middlewares are elements that will be like all the requests will pass through that when I actually use the use element, and it will do it in a specific how can I say it, order, right? So there are several middlewares that we can use that will help us in our application. And the logger is one of the main ones. So we actually have the logger one right there. And we can do something called, let's do this one, for example, helmet. Helmet, what it does is an express middleware that will add some security headers, right? It's not it doesn't mean that our application is going to be secure right away just to use it. Just applies best practices through the header, like content security policy, DNS prefetch control, expect-CT framework, that will add network stuff to our calls. The way to use it is we just need to install it, import it, and use it. Exactly the same that we use for the rest, right? And let me close this. And let me show you what I'm talking about. So whenever we make a call, right, we go to the headers. We can see different elements over here. For example, we can see the power by. By default, our application is telling us who is making the request, right? And this is how can I say it? This could alert possible attackers just to know what type of server do we have. So they will say, okay, they're using Express. Let me look for Express vulnerability and let me try to exploit that. So what best practice is actually to hide these headers and other ones that we could have over here. And we can disable it manually, but Helmet is a really good starting point to do that. So we just need to install Helmet. Right, let me do npm run that again. And for that, it doesn't make sense to create a different file. Let's use it right here. Let's do import Helmet from Helmet, right? And we can actually use application that use Helmet. That's it. With that call, we can actually make another one. Remember, we have 6 elements in the header by default. And when we send it, now we have 15. In those 15, we have, for example, frame option, same origin, expected age 0, no sniffing, like adult, X protection, this basic information. And the X power by is not there anymore. Right, so it's just given some more security standard or baseline headed by itself. And it's just working in the app. So it's better to have it like that. Another middleware that is really famous that we can actually use is called Course. Course is to prevent the cross origin. That means that not everybody could actually handle um, or no every application can use or API. So through Course we can actually specify the origin and say, you know what, the API came for this particular place, proceed, right? That's pretty much what we do in there. So in order to make it to work, and we can actually send something like this, is let's just install it. npm install course. For that one, I will say we need to call origin. And let's make my origin will be in this case my local host, oops, 8080, because my Vue.js app will be in this particular case. So I will use my origin like that. And because I'm adding a new element, I can use over here as my port, I will do origin. Origin will be a join dot URL, well, should be a string, require, but actually I believe I can use URL. Let me just verify that. Um, is no URL. The element should be URI, I believe. Let me look. Mm, let's see the types for the strings. There's one called, we don't have URL, but we have URI. And URI, what it does, a valid in URI itself. We can add different schemas, accept JIT or JIT, HTTP, HTTPS. Okay, so we can see the standard. I don't know if we have time for that, but yeah, we just follow it a traditional URL, and we can have the schema to be different. I can do yeah. So let's actually this one to be string dot URI require, right? And we can actually export it. Origin going to be my env origin, right? So having that, I can do npm run dev. It's working fine. If my URL is not valid, something like this, for example, let's see. Oh well, that's a valid one. Try that one. Yeah. Origin must be a valid URI. So localhost, I believe that one is a valid URI. It's not. Port 8080. Let's save it. that one is a valid one. So we can use like that, or we can use HTTP, and that one is a valid one too. So with that, we're able to have validation to your URI. So now that we have the URI, we can actually, and we imported course already. Let me go to my index, and we just need to import course from course, and we can use application, use course, and it was the origin is going to confirm that origin, and that's it. That will allow me to use my origin implementing my configuration is the only application, web application. Something really important that HTTP requests to a client, those are still valid because these are not like an HTTP application by itself. But in the other case, will be only the app that we actually mentioned that should be working in that. Okay? So let me add everything and added course. So our application now is getting bigger, get a little more robust, more I will say production ready. That's the way that it's supposed to be, right? Now, um, something extra that I want to add is what should be the next thing? We imported the Express, we have the logger, course, um, helmet. Yeah, let's do error handling. Right, let's actually use the not found. So right now, here, when something doesn't exist, we just have this error. I don't want it to have that type of response. I want to have a better response that it should be implemented. For that, let's create in utils or a better error handling. So let's go to utils, new file, and we call this errors.javascript. And the first thing that I need to do, I need to import my logger from the logger, right? I need now, so far we have been using already constructed middleware. We're going to use our new one, right? And that new URL should be really, really simple. Um, let's do, so we need to call it, we need to create um, an error handler. And let's actually do two. We need to have our error handler that is going to be generic. And then we need to create a new one. And that should be just the 404. So my error handler will get the error element, right? The request, the response, and the next element. What it means is we send an error, it will go right away over here. But if we send a request or response, we can proceed. And next should be just whenever we need to proceed to go to the particular status, right? So for this, we have our handler and we can actually, I don't need to have that one that you can see there. So I need to verify my status code. If I have an error and my status code is 200, I need to change that to a server error. So I need to do const code going to be equal. I need to check my response. If it's 200, I need to change it to 500. That means server error. If it's not 200, I proceed with the same one. What happens some errors when you have a really gracefully handling, you have a response without data, for example, but we are not telling the user that something went wrong in there. In this case, we're just making sure that our status code is going to be error handling when you just try to respond normally, right? So we do that, and then we can actually do our logger dot log dot error, and let's send a message. Well, the message will be our error message, and our stack trace will be our error stack, right? So we just making this error to be available in the console. Remember, the logger goes to the console itself, and it's complaining. Why is complaining? Oh, there you go. So this is just to make sure that it's going to be printed in the console or on the logs for the application itself, but not send it to the client yet, right? So what we need to do is I need to make sure that my status code is going to be the status that I already handled over here. My message will be my error message, and my stack will be my error stack, right? And instead of error, actually call this error. Probably should be a little bit better. Let's do something like this. There you go. And I can do export default error handler, right? You can do something like that. It's complaining that next was declared no use. We can keep it like that, but this is actually the order. So we have elements that we are not going to be used. Good practice is to have like a underscore, but we cannot remove it because it's in a particular order. In this case, I believe the next can be removed, but let's just keep it the way it's supposed to be, right? So this is going to be my error handler. But now let's actually do the one for the can I say the not found? Let's actually I have right here. So the not found is going to be another middleware. So I have two middlewares. The not found will use the error handler and saying I have a request, response, and next. So the not found will be exactly an error. I will throw a new error, right? And actually, the way that we should be able to do it, we can actually change this a little bit. How we call the error on the configuration? New error, we use the name with the error message, yeah. So let's call this new error. Now let's call the error dot message, just to have that error right there. And the not found should be exported too. Right? Yeah, beautiful. So here we know that this will throw a stack and my logger will handle the stack the way it's supposed to be. But for the user, we just send the status code and the message and the stack itself. This will cache everything that is sent, and it will catch us as a 404 by default. And we'll provide then an error. That error is going to go and use this particular handler. Next, that means they go to the next middleware. This is going to be the next middleware. But this one that doesn't use next, that means that the request will stop right here. We can have this one like that. We send the status and then the JSON response, or we can actually use response that one and then response JSON. Both methods are valid, whatever is easy for you. Well, I like to pipe it up. So probably let's separate this a little bit to readability. Yeah, I like it as a error handler. So that means we should be able now to go to a main or index, and we should be able to import the errors from our application itself. So let's do import um, error from util errors, and after we have and those errors should be pretty much at the end of the application. So before we actually use the app, that's actually with the listen element to application.use, I will use my errors dot not found first, and then my application.use my error.error handler, right? That means that the way that it works with the middlewares, this is actually a middleware to a specific path, right? So the way it's going to go through this order, and when nothing gets fulfilled, it will send it right away to my not found. Really similar to what we did with Vue.js to catch everything at the end. And the error handler, whenever we throw a new error or we do a next error, it go right away to the last element. And this should be always the last element in our app. So with that, if I make a call to here, it's working fine, but it's on something that doesn't exist, like X, and I send it. We have get X, we have an issue, right? And we have the error the way it's supposed to, not found, define it, etc., etc., etc. Right? And didn't use the logger the way that I was thinking they was using it. So um, probably I can use something like this. So it respond the status code, but it didn't respond with this error here the way that it's supposed to be at the error. So let me verify my status code is 404, so that works. You send me this, it should not be sending this. So something I'm doing wrong here. Let me check what I'm actually doing wrong that is not supposed to be like this. Mm. And this one is not working either. It's actually sending me HTML by default, and it's supposed to be sending me JSON file. So that means it's not getting my middleware the way that it's supposed to be. So let me verify that. Okay, I found my issue. Remember that next was not being used and we remove it, right? So that was not allowing to the next element to work properly. So this was the one sending the error and not it was not sending it properly. So now I can actually send it. I can see my message not found with my path, my stack trace complete over here, and a nice stack trace on my log over here. Right? And it's actually responding fine, the way that it's supposed to. The um, last thing that I would like to do is in my error handler, I want to see my node env, because what is happening whenever we send the error stack to the user, that's a security vulnerability, and that should happen only in development. That means that we need to verify that we are on production. So the way to do it, and the fastest way will be through the process.env.node-env, right? We know it like that. And we can send something like that, and probably not that one. I don't know why you gave me the pancake. I don't like the pancake. Let's do the poop emoji. There you go. So what I'm saying is the stack will be a poop when I'm in production, or the error stack when I'm not in production, that means on development. This means if I make a call, I get everything. But if I change this to production, right, and then restart the server in order to pull up the .env, and I make the call again, I don't send this error stack anymore because it just got protected. But as you can see, it still show up in my logger on the server side. So we're not sending to the user the error, but we are sending the problem to the application itself, right? So let's just get rid of this production. Let's get it back to development. Let's start the server because we're in development right now and we need to see that error stack. And the one last thing that we need to do is our ESLint wanted, we have declared no to have that. So in order, a quick fix is to, probably we can prefix it. Does that work? No. A quick fix should be disable the no use bar for this line. So with that, we'll get rid of that error and the application is working how it's supposed to be, right? We have the error there and we have the hello there in the root path, right? So I believe we have the hardening pretty much done. Let's add error handler, add it, right? And the last one that I want to do, or what I want to change here, and I believe we have pretty much almost everything, is to handle the root or the router a little bit better, right? We should not get the route in our main index.js. It's not a best practice. So the best practice is to have a route saved in a different file, and that one is going to be, how can I say? That one is should be the one that is going to be created or generated, right? So for now, we're just going to get rid of this and put it in a file that can be duplicated the way that it's supposed to be, right? So we're going to create a new folder inside source called routes. And in the routes, we're going to create a new file called index.javascript. That will be the entry point that will get all the routes imported. And we're going to get one called new file, the different route. So this is going to be the root. That means the principal one that we're going to be using. So in order to create that, in order to enable it in a root, and this is pretty much the forward slash, what we need to do, we need to import something from Express, right? And from that Express, we actually need to import our router. in order to create a specific router route the way that it's supposed to be. We need to import our logger too from our logger, and I believe our logger is right there. I don't know where it's at. We need to get one level back and then utils logger. There you go. And we initialize a router being a new router instance, right? Now that we initialize that router instance here, um, we just importing this. We can actually go back to our index JavaScript. We can get everything from that, the root, and put it right here. The only difference that instead of doing our application will be our router. And the reason that we imported the logger is because we're using the logger right here. That's why. And we need to export default the router itself. So this is how we can, um, what is the word that I want to say? Um, Separate the logic and keep a specific file with just with the route itself that need to be created. Now, the idea here is we have several files. For example, we could have the API endpoint and go on and go on, and all those endpoints at the end, and we'll actually create that in the next video. It's going to get imported in our routes index. Our route index will be the one that will wrap everything the routes and export them directly. So here we just need to repeat the router from Express, right? And we need to import root or root route from here, right there. And of course, we need to initialize the router. And the same way that we use it for the app, we use the route need to use the root one. And that's it. Now we can actually specify what is going to be the path, and we say it's going to be for the main path or for the API path or whatever we wanted. But if we don't specify anything, it's going to go right there. And we just need to export our router itself. So later when we have the API endpoint, we can import API from, I know this doesn't exist now, but from API, for example. And then we can actually use something like I forget how to clone it. Yeah, I don't remember anymore. Okay. So on router.use API, in the API endpoint, use APIs and go on, go on. We actually create the different router elements for the different endpoints, and we can separate those endpoints on different routes in different files. So we have a better, and I forget the name, uh, scaffolding of the application itself, right? But right now we don't have the API yet, so we just using the root route, right? And that means that we need to import that one here as a middleware. And the way to use it, I will say after all the utils, I will do import router from route. And because we have an index JavaScript, we will actually pull up that one right away. And before our error handling, we say our application needs to use our router. And actually remove, I imported something extra. There you go. And that's it. That means that our main index JavaScript should not change anymore, and the rest of the logic should happen in the different areas. So you just make a call just to verify it's working. We'll still able to pull that, and we should be able to pull the error stack, right? So yeah, our application is working the way it's supposed to, and we're able to scaffold a little bit better what it's supposed to be, right? So I will stop the video now. I believe this should be more than enough to have a real world. Let me add it, add the router. And in the next video, we actually what we're going to be doing is our to-do application or to-do API handled through Node.js. So I hope that you like it. Any question or any doubt, don't hesitate to reach me. Happy coding, everybody.